My name is Emma Reed, and I live in America. The morning after my father's memorial service in Boston, I stood on the porch of our gray craftsman on Willow Street with my suitcase at my feet and a knot in my throat. The cedar shingles still smelled like rain, and the porch swing moved slightly in the breeze as if my father had just left it. He had bought this house 20 years ago for $380,000 and always said it was his proudest purchase. He loved its arched doorway, the old oak banister, and the way the light came through the stained glass window in the foyer each morning. Inside, the sound of high heels echoed on the wooden floor. My stepmother, Clarissa, stood in the dining room, flipping through property documents as if she were running a business meeting instead of mourning her husband. Her daughter, Sloane, lounged on our leather sofa, one manicured hand wrapped around a glass of wine, scrolling through home decor photos on her tablet. Clarissa looked at me with a smirk that carried no warmth. "Emma," she said sweetly, "you've had your time here. It's time to move forward." I frowned. "Move forward? This is my home." "Not anymore." She set the papers down neatly. "Your father's estate now belongs to me. The Beacon Hill condo, the Vermont cabin, the city pension, everything. I married your father for this day. You can collect your things and leave by tonight." I froze. "You can't be serious. The funeral was yesterday." "Oh, I'm very serious," she replied, her tone like ice. "He left me everything. I have the will right here." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a legal document stamped and signed, naming her as the sole heir. My eyes scanned the lines, heart pounding, but the ink looked too new, too dark. Dad had been careful with money and law. He never made sudden changes. "You forged this," I said quietly. Her smile widened. "Accusations won't change what's written. You can find another place to live, can't you? You're a working woman." I glanced at Sloane, who looked up long enough to say, "We're getting rid of the old kitchen. White marble, gold fixtures, the works. Dad's taste was outdated." My chest tightened. That kitchen was where I learned to cook with him, where he'd burned pancakes and laughed until we cried. Now it was just another project to gut for profit. Clarissa tapped her nails on the table. "You'll need to return the house keys. I'll have the locks changed by noon." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I walked to the foyer, where Dad's bronze bowl used to hold spare change. It was empty. My throat burned as I picked up my suitcase and turned toward the door. "He loved this house," I said softly. "Yes," Clarissa replied, "and now I love it too." Outside, the October air bit at my cheeks. The maple tree in front of the house dropped a red leaf into my hair. I looked back one last time, just in time to see Sloane holding up fabric swatches, already planning her new curtains. That night, I checked into a small hotel in Back Bay. It cost $168 for the night, more than I wanted to spend, but I had nowhere else to go. I dropped my suitcase beside the bed and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. My savings sat at $12,400. My freelance marketing work brought in about $4,200 a month, but my next payment wouldn't arrive for 2 weeks. The thought of losing the house, the memories, and my father all at once felt unbearable. I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet titled Plan B. Dad always told me to plan for everything, even heartbreak. I listed my expenses, rent, food, car insurance, and tried to stretch my savings across 3 months. I added one more line at the bottom. Find out what happened to Dad's will. Around midnight, I scrolled through my phone, searching for old photos of him. That's when I found a voice memo dated 1 week before his supposed death. My hands trembled as I pressed play. His voice filled the room, steady and warm. "Kiddo, keep your head no matter what happens. If you ever feel pushed to the curb, look for the hinges. Doors swing both ways." I replayed it 3 times before setting the phone on the nightstand. What did he mean by hinges? It sounded like a clue, something more than comfort. The next morning, I woke early and walked to Willow Street. The house looked smaller in the daylight. A moving truck was parked in the driveway. Clarissa stood on the porch giving orders to 2 movers, her designer sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. When she saw me, she smiled like a victor. Remember to forward your mail, she said. I didn't reply. My voice would have broken. I turned and walked away, vowing silently that I'd find out the truth. Dad's words replayed in my mind. Look for the hinges. Something deep inside told me his story wasn't over. The will looked wrong, the dates too neat, the ink too fresh. My father was a man who never left things unfinished. As I crossed the street, I made a promise to myself. If there was even the smallest chance that Clarissa had stolen what wasn't hers, I'd uncover it. I didn't care how long it took. That night, I moved into a small studio apartment in Cambridge. It was barely 400 square feet, the walls painted pale yellow, but it was mine. I unpacked my clothes, set my father's old hammer on the windowsill, and took a deep breath. The city outside hummed with life, buses, sirens, laughter. But inside, all I heard was my father's voice. If you ever feel pushed to the curb, look for the hinges. I opened my notebook and wrote those words at the top of the first page. I didn't know what they meant yet, but I would find out. Clarissa thought she'd won, but she didn't know my father like I did. Something told me the story wasn't finished, and neither was he. The first month in my tiny studio in Cambridge passed in a blur of exhaustion and quiet determination. Rent was $1,950. The radiator hissed like a restless cat, and my laptop stayed open most nights with spreadsheets and browser tabs scattered across the screen. The butter-yellow walls did little to calm me, but I refused to give up. I'd lost my home, my inheritance, and my sense of family, but not my instincts. Something about my father's death felt wrong, and every instinct in me whispered that Clarissa was hiding something. The first place I went was the probate court on Pemberton Square. The building smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. The clerk, a kind woman with graying hair and a patient tone, handed me a copy of the will that Clarissa had filed. You can review it here, she said, gesturing toward a small desk near the window. I spread out the pages carefully, my eyes moving line by line. It looked legitimate at first, typed, signed, notarized. But when I reached the witness section, something strange jumped out. Two names, Frank C. Halperin and Judy A. Miles. I didn't recognize either. The notary seal was perfect, too perfect. My father had never been one for such polish. I pulled out my phone and started searching. Judy Miles was a payroll specialist for a company in Chicago that handled benefit payments for municipal employees. My father had worked in Boston's city planning department before he retired. Why would a payroll clerk from Chicago witness his will in Boston? Then there was Frank Halperin, a small print shop owner from Somerville. Again, no connection. My father's attorney, Paul Sterling, had always handled his legal paperwork. Why wasn't his name anywhere? I called Paul's office immediately. His assistant, a woman named Michelle, answered. Mr. Sterling is out on extended leave, she said smoothly. He's expected back at the end of the month. Is he all right? I asked. I'm afraid I can't disclose that, she replied before hanging up. Extended leave. That wasn't like Paul. He and my father had been close for decades. If Paul had suddenly vanished, there was a reason. That night, I opened my father's last credit card statement. Every purchase felt like a breadcrumb. A $64 charge at a florist in Portland, Maine. A $42 tank of gas in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And a $72 grocery store bill in Montpelier, Vermont. Portland to Portsmouth to Montpelier, it was a trail moving steadily north. My heart began to race as I pulled out a map and traced the route with a pencil. Each stop formed a path leading toward the edge of New England, then silence. If he had been traveling before his death, where would he have gone? At 10:47 that night, my phone rang from a private number. I hesitated before answering. When I didn't, it went to voicemail. A man's voice came through, calm and official. Ms. Reed, this is Officer Mulligan from the Boston Police Department. We need you to confirm the identification of your father's personal effects. You can reach me at the number on file. Personal effects. The words made my chest tighten. The message included an address near the harbor, but the office hours were odd, 7:15 to 9:30 in the morning. Who keeps hours like that? The next morning I went. The office existed, and Officer Mulligan was real. a man with tired eyes and coffee-stained paperwork stacked around his desk. He handed me a small box labeled Daniel Reed. Inside were 3 items: his old wristwatch, scratched but still ticking faintly, a plain gold ring I had never seen him wear, and his wallet. The wallet held $18, a few business cards, and a library card, but no driver's license, no ID, no credit cards. Nothing that identified him as Daniel Reed, the retired city planner. "This is all we recovered," Mulligan said. "All?" I asked. He nodded. "From the hospital. That's what they turned in." "Hospital." My pulse spiked. "Which hospital?" He frowned at his paperwork. "It says transfer unknown origin. Might have been an administrative hold before the case closed." It sounded wrong. Every detail felt rehearsed. I left with the box clutched to my chest, my mind spinning. As I stepped out into the chilly morning air, I passed a bulletin board near the entrance. A faded flyer caught my eye, an announcement for a public talk. Estate Planning and Family Trusts, speaker, Paul Sterling, ESQ. The event had taken place 3 months ago at a library in a coastal Maine town. My heart jolted. If Paul had been there, maybe Dad had too. I snapped a photo of the flyer, recognizing the name of the town instantly. We used to visit it every summer for fried clams and boat rides. Dad always said it was his quiet place. By noon, I had rented a small gray sedan for $68 and was driving north, the ocean glinting to my right. The farther I went, the clearer everything felt. The will, the missing ID, the suspicious witnesses, it all pointed to something deliberate. When I reached the library, the front desk clerk, a young woman with freckles and a soft voice, showed me a binder of past events. There it was, the lecture Paul had given. Inside the binder's pocket was a business card with his handwriting on the back. 5 words, scrawled in blue ink. "Trust solve problems that grief invents." I sank into a wooden chair, gripping the card. It wasn't just a quote. It was a message. Trusts. Grief. Problems. My father had been deeply private about his finances, always preferring legal safety nets over spoken promises. What if he had placed everything, not in a will, but in a trust? That would make Clarissa's version worthless. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt since his memorial. Hope. On the way back, I stopped at a small coffee shop in a harbor town. The barista, a cheerful man in his 20s, chatted as he handed me my drink. "Good book?" I said, pointing to the worn novel sitting by the register. He smiled. "Thanks." A regular gave it to me, a nice older guy with carpenter's hands. "Comes in every morning. Likes his coffee black, no sugar. Says he's living out by Miller's Cove for a while." My heart stopped. Did he say his name? "Dan, I think," the barista said, tapping his chin. "Yeah, Dan something. Always pays in cash." For a moment, the room spun. My father hated sugar. He loved coffee. And for a while was exactly the kind of thing he'd say when he didn't want people to know where he was. As I stepped back into the cool afternoon light, I could feel it in my bones. He wasn't gone. He was somewhere out there, watching, waiting, and maybe even testing who I would become when everything was stripped away. And I was ready to find him. I woke before dawn, my heart pounding with a strange kind of energy. The clues had led me here, to Miller's Cove, a quiet place tucked between pine trees and gray ocean water. As the sun began to rise, I packed a small bag, rented another car, and started driving north. The farther I got from Boston, the more certain I became that I was heading towards something life-changing. The road narrowed, trees closed in, and gold leaves flickered across my windshield like whispers from the past. When I finally turned onto the gravel lane that led to the address I'd found, a small property on the edge of the cove, I nearly stopped breathing. There, at the end of the lane, stood a cedar cabin with a wraparound porch and smoke rising faintly from its chimney. A weathered pickup truck sat parked out front, the same color and model as my father's old one. And above the left headlight I saw it, the small dent shaped like a crescent moon. I had been with him the day he'd hit a parking post near Fenway and laughed, saying, "Every mark tells a story." I turned off the engine and sat there for a full minute. Then, with shaking hands, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the porch. The boards creaked under my shoes, and the scent of coffee drifted through the cool morning air. I raised my hand and knocked once. The door opened just a crack. Through the narrow space, I saw a familiar hand reach for the handle, rough, tanned, and scarred on the knuckles from years of carpentry. My breath caught in my chest. Then, the door opened wider, and there he was. My father. Alive. He looked older somehow, his beard grayer, his face lined, but his eyes, those steady blue eyes, were exactly as I remembered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a low, trembling voice, I whispered, "Dad." He smiled faintly, stepped forward, and pulled me into his arms. "I'm sorry, kiddo," he murmured against my hair. "I had to know." The dam inside me broke. I cried like a child, gripping the back of his jacket, feeling the heartbeat I'd thought was gone forever. He held me tighter, his hand resting on my shoulder the way he always used to when words weren't enough. When we finally sat down at the pine table by the window, sunlight poured across the surface, catching the edge of his coffee mug. My mind was still trying to understand what was happening. He was alive, drinking coffee, sitting across from me as if he hadn't just faked his own death. "Dad, what is this?" I asked, wiping my face. "You let me believe you were gone." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know. I didn't want to, but I needed to see the truth. After my health scare back in the spring, I started thinking about what would happen if I really did die. I wanted to make sure you'd be protected, but I also needed to know who I could trust." "Clarissa?" I said bitterly. He nodded. I saw small cruelties in her, but I wasn't sure how deep they ran. So Paul and I devised a plan. I created a living trust, with you as the sole beneficiary. That trust owns everything: our home, the Beacon Hill condo, the Vermont cabin, my pension, and the municipal bonds. The will she filed, the one that left her everything, was bait. It would only take effect if the trust didn't exist. My mouth went dry. So, she never really had control? He shook his head. "Not legally. But I needed to see what she would do when she thought she did." I leaned back, trying to breathe. "You let her throw me out. You let her humiliate me." Pain flickered across his face. I watched Emma. I saw it all. She changed the locks before the memorial, called appraisers to sell the Beacon Hill condo for quick cash, and even tried to redirect my pension to her account. Paul recorded every call. When she said she married me for this day, well, she proved herself. I stared at him, my hands trembling. "And now," he said, his voice firm, "there will be a judge. I filed for divorce this morning. The papers were served at the house." She laughed at first, asked who would pay the legal bills. I told the court the trust would cover them. Then I transferred everything, every property and account, into your name. For a moment, the air in the cabin seemed to change. I could feel the shift in my chest, the weight of disbelief lifting, replaced by something fierce and solid. My father, who had faked his death to measure loyalty, had chosen me. "Dad," I said softly, "I don't know what to say." He reached across the table and covered my hands with his. "You don't have to. Just promise me you'll live wisely. Build something lasting. And don't let bitterness make you small." We sat there for a while, the sound of waves against the shore filling the silence. I thought about Clarissa and Sloane in the house on Willow Street, redecorating and celebrating what they thought they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. By early afternoon, Dad said it was time to go back. I followed his truck down the winding highway, my heart pounding the whole way. When we finally pulled into our old driveway, Clarissa was standing on the porch in a silk robe, holding a mug of coffee like a prop in a play. For a moment, she just stared. Then the mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the steps. Her face went from pale to crimson. "What kind of sick joke is this?" she hissed. "You made me a widow." Dad walked up the steps calmly. "No," he said. "I made you honest." Sloane appeared behind her, clutching a throw pillow like a shield. "I see you started the renovation," Dad said, glancing at the construction materials piled near the door. "That's convenient." You won't need to finish it. The house belongs to my daughter now. Clarissa let out a hard, sharp laugh. I have a will. And I have a trust, Dad replied, handing her a folder thick with documents. And a divorce petition. She flipped through the first page, and her confidence cracked. Her shoulders slumped, her lips parted in shock. You can't do this, she whispered. I already have, he said simply. For a long moment no one moved. Then Dad said quietly, keys. Clarissa stared at him with fury so intense it almost looked like grief. But in the end, she placed the keys on the porch railing, turned on her heel, and walked inside without another word. That night, Dad and I ate pizza on the living room floor, surrounded by boxes of my things that she hadn't bothered to move yet. The smell of fresh dough and melted cheese mixed with the faint scent of sawdust. He leaned back against the wall and smiled. You did good, kiddo. I didn't do anything, I said. He shook his head. You did. You followed the clues. You trusted your gut. You stood in the wind and didn't break. I looked around the room that had been my home, lost, and then found again. The walls felt warmer somehow, like they recognized me. For the first time since his death, I finally felt safe enough to breathe. 3 months later, the court signed the divorce decree that officially ended my father's marriage to Clarissa. The courtroom was quiet that morning, sunlight slanting through tall windows, the smell of polished wood and old paper hanging in the air. Clarissa sat across the aisle wearing black, as though she were still in mourning, though not for my father, only for the money she'd lost. When the judge read the decision, her lips trembled, but her eyes stayed hard. She received a single settlement, a fraction of what she thought she'd inherit, and no claim to any of his properties or pensions. When it was over, she looked at me once, a glare that could have cut glass, and whispered, You ruined my life. I didn't flinch. No, I told her softly. You revealed it. That was the last time I ever saw her. After the ruling, my father and I drove back to Willow Street in silence. It was early March, the sidewalks wet from melting snow, the air cool but full of promise. When we pulled into the driveway, he looked at the house as though seeing it for the first time again. Home, he said simply. And it was. He took the sunny back bedroom that faced the maple tree, the same one that had shed its red leaves over my head the morning I left. He spent his days restoring what Clarissa had carelessly torn apart, repainting the porch, fixing loose floorboards, replanting herbs in the small garden. He said the smell of fresh mint made him feel alive again. I chose the front bedroom for myself, turned it into an office, and bought a second-hand desk for $140. I added a swivel chair that made me feel, for the first time, like a woman with a future. I kept my Cambridge studio for a while, just in case. Some nights I still woke up panicked, thinking I'd lost everything again. But slowly, the fear began to fade. With all properties and accounts now legally under my name, I made a plan. The Beacon Hill condo, worth about $1.2 million, became my first source of steady income. I rented it to a quiet professor from Boston University for $4,200 a month. He loved the old windows, the creaky floors, and paid on time. The Vermont Lake cabin, though beautiful, felt too heavy with memories, so I sold it to a young family for $610,000. They promised to keep the dock and the red canoe. It made the goodbye easier. After paying off the remaining debts and setting aside $300,000 in a high-yield account, I finally felt grounded. For years, I had managed other people's campaigns and marketing budgets, yet my own life had been chaos. Now, the numbers felt like a handrail, something steady to hold on to. Dad returned to consulting part-time for the city's planning department. They needed his experience for a new waterfront project, and he accepted happily. He worked about 40 hours a month, just enough to stay busy, without losing his freedom. Every evening, he'd come home with blueprints rolled under his arm and stories about sidewalks, parks, and public benches. We'd eat pasta while he showed me how to read the lines, how good design made space for people, not just buildings. You see this, he'd say, tapping a line on the paper. Every inch matters. Just like in life. If something is off by a fraction, the whole thing collapses. He wasn't just talking about city plans anymore. In April, I drove up the coast to meet Paul Sterling, my father's lawyer and co-conspirator in the plan that changed everything. We met at the same library where I'd first found his note. He looked tired but proud when he saw me. "I have to admit," he said with a grin, "I didn't think your father's test would end this well." I laughed. "Neither did I." He leaned forward. "You handled everything, Emma. The investigation, the pressure, the aftermath. Most people would have folded." "Maybe I had to break first," I said. He chuckled. "Promise me one thing. Never let your father stage another death. My blood pressure can't handle it." We both laughed until tears rolled down my cheeks. When I left, the wind off the ocean felt softer somehow, as if the world had exhaled. Back in Boston, life began to bloom again. I decided to start something new, a small firm to help women navigate finances after loss or betrayal. I named it Hinge Advisory because of what my father had once said: doors swing both ways. It felt right. My first 3 clients came from a community center in Roxbury. They were women in their 30s and 40s, each recovering from something: divorce, death, or deceit. I charged just $75 an hour, enough to sustain myself while I built credibility. I taught them how to track accounts, how to question documents, and how to recognize forged signatures that looked too clean. I showed them how to follow the trail of money and how to find strength in truth. Every time I watched one of them regain confidence, I felt like I was healing alongside them. By June, Dad and I had settled into a rhythm. Weekends meant porch repairs, grocery runs, and long evening talks. Sometimes I'd catch him standing by the garden, looking toward the street, his hands resting on his hips. "You know," he said once, "I thought I'd lost everything the day I staged that fake death. But I gained something better. I saw you stand tall." That night, we had a cookout on the porch. My friend Maya brought a strawberry pie. Our neighbor Ben showed up with his guitar, and the air smelled like grilled chicken and basil. Dad burned 2 pieces on purpose, as he always did, claiming, "A little char keeps a person honest." We ate, laughed, and let the night settle softly around us. As the sun dipped behind the church steeple across the street, Dad turned to me with a smile. "Kiddo," he said, raising his glass of lemonade, "how does it feel to own your life?" I thought of everything. The night Clarissa threw me out, the cold hotel room, the fake will, the cabin by the water, the moment I knocked on his door and saw him alive. I thought about every hinge that had turned since then, every door that had opened, because I refused to give up. "It feels like I can breathe," I said quietly. "Like the air finally belongs to me." He clinked his glass against mine. "To strong hinges," he said. "To strong hinges," I echoed, smiling. The porch light glowed above us, spilling warmth over the floorboards my father and I had sanded by hand years ago. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anything, not approval, not inheritance, not permission. I had everything I needed right there. A roof built on truth, a family rebuilt on love, and a life that finally opened in all the right directions.